Chosen one, pay close attention to what has been unfolding within your spirit recently, because the heaviness you have been sensing is not the weight of fear or ordinary anxiety. What you have felt is the pressure of revelation approaching, the kind that arrives quietly at first, but carries the gravity of something heaven has been preparing for a long time. For many days or even weeks, your heart may have felt unusually alert, as though something important was shifting just beyond the edge of your understanding. You may have tried to interpret that feeling as stress or uncertainty, yet the deeper truth is that your spirit has been responding to a moment of spiritual transition. Scripture reminds us in Daniel 2:22 that God reveals deep and hidden things and knows what lies in darkness, revealing how divine truth often emerges only when the time for understanding has arrived. For years, the Chosen One prayed with sincerity, asking God questions that seemed to echo back in silence. In those quiet seasons, you may have wondered whether heaven truly noticed your prayers, or whether your voice was lost among countless others rising from believers across the world. Yet heaven now reveals that the silence you experienced was never abandonment. It was protection. The truth about to unfold required a maturity of heart and endurance of faith that you have only recently grown strong enough to carry. God is now preparing to reveal something extraordinary, a divine exception written specifically into the story of your life and calling. Chosen one, there were many moments in your journey when you quietly wondered why your spiritual life seemed to follow a different pattern than the stories you saw unfolding around you. You watched others claim the promises of God and appear to receive them quickly, sometimes even while their devotion seemed inconsistent or casual. Meanwhile, you prayed with sincerity, sought wisdom, and tried to walk faithfully, yet the results you hoped for often arrived slowly or not in the form you expected. This contrast created a subtle tension within your heart, a feeling that something in your own life must be malfunctioning, even though you were doing everything you knew to remain aligned with God. The Chosen One may have questioned whether the promises of heaven were truly meant for you in the same way they seemed to bless others. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 73 that the writer once struggled with the same confusion, observing the prosperity of people who appeared indifferent to faith, while his own path felt burdened by difficulty. That ancient testimony reveals that such questions are not signs of rebellion, but part of a deeper search for understanding. You were not imagining the difference you sensed, yet the reason behind it remained hidden for a long time. The discomfort you felt came from living under a calling that required a different process than the one you observed in others. What seemed like malfunction was actually evidence that your life was being shaped according to a different design. As the years unfolded, the Chosen One often watched situations that seemed unfair from a human perspective. People who dismissed spiritual discipline sometimes advanced quickly in careers, relationships, or opportunities that you had prayed about for years. Their progress appeared effortless, while your path felt marked by waiting, testing, and repeated delays that rarely made sense at the time. In quiet moments, you may have wrestled with the question of why devotion seemed to lead you into deeper challenges rather than immediate reward. The comparison between your life and theirs occasionally stirred frustration that you rarely spoke about openly. Proverbs 3:5-6 encourages believers to trust in the Lord rather than relying solely on their own understanding. Yet that instruction becomes difficult when circumstances appear to contradict expectation. The Chosen One remained faithful, even when confusion whispered that the promises of God might operate differently for others than for you. In truth, those moments were not evidence that heaven had overlooked your prayers, but signs that your life was being guided through a process of preparation. The blessings you saw appearing easily in other lives were not necessarily aligned with the specific purpose God was forming in yours. What seemed like delay was often protection from paths that would have diverted you from the assignment designed uniquely for your spirit. In this way, the contrast between your journey and the journeys of others became part of a larger lesson about divine timing. During the most difficult parts of this journey, the questions you carried often remained hidden within private conversations between you and God. The Chosen One might have spoken honestly during prayer, asking why the answers you sought seemed to arrive only after long seasons of silence. There may have been nights when your faith felt tired, when hope struggled to remain steady, and when you quietly wondered whether heaven truly heard the words you spoke. Those moments of vulnerability were not signs that your faith had collapsed, but reflections of a heart seeking deeper understanding. Psalm 34:17 promises that the Lord hears the cries of the righteous and delivers them from all their troubles, reminding you that even when silence appears to surround your prayers, heaven remains attentive to every word. The doubt you experienced did not disqualify you from God's purpose, because doubt often emerges when faith encounters circumstances it cannot yet explain. What mattered was that you continued seeking God, even when your understanding felt incomplete. The Chosen One remained engaged in conversation with heaven instead of abandoning it entirely. Through that persistence, your faith matured beyond simple expectation into something stronger and more resilient. Those quiet prayers formed part of the foundation that prepared your heart for the revelation now unfolding. What you did not realize at the time was that the discomfort you felt came from living under a different spiritual constitution than the one guiding many of the people around you. Some lives move along paths where blessings appear quickly but carry little long-term responsibility. Your life, however, was being shaped for a purpose that required greater endurance and deeper character. God often prepares those with significant assignments through processes that appear slower because the foundation must support greater weight. Jeremiah 29:11 reminds us that God has plans for his people that lead toward hope and a future. Yet the path toward that future sometimes includes seasons where the reason behind the journey remains hidden. The Chosen One was never malfunctioning spiritually. You were being formed within a system designed specifically for your calling. Just as different instruments are built for different kinds of music, different lives are prepared for different forms of service within God's kingdom. What looked like delay was actually calibration, adjusting your character and faith to carry the responsibilities that lie ahead. The discomfort you felt was the tension created when a person senses purpose but cannot yet see its full shape. That tension often appears as frustration until the moment when revelation finally explains what was happening all along. As heaven now reveals this truth, the Chosen One begins understanding the earlier seasons of confusion through a new perspective. The sense of being different was never a sign that something within you was broken or misaligned with God's promises. Instead, it was the earliest signal that your life was operating under a calling designed for unique impact. Romans 8:28 assures believers that God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose, revealing how even confusion becomes part of a larger design. The path you walked required endurance because the purpose attached to your life carries influence that extends beyond personal success. God was not withholding blessings from you, but shaping your spirit to handle them without losing sight of their meaning. The Chosen One now recognizes that the difference you sensed was actually confirmation that heaven was guiding your journey through a unique process. What once appeared to be malfunction was in reality evidence of divine design unfolding slowly and precisely. The questions that once troubled your heart are now transforming into understanding as God reveals the reason behind the unusual path you have walked. Chosen One, as heaven begins revealing the deeper structure behind your life's journey, one truth emerges with unmistakable clarity. You were never meant to move through life in the same pattern as everyone around you. The unusual delays, the doors that seemed to close without explanation, and the path that often felt isolated were not random obstacles, but signs of something sacred taking place beneath the surface. Scripture teaches that to be sanctified means to be set apart, removed from ordinary use and dedicated to a specific purpose in the hands of God. This idea appears throughout the Bible, particularly in passages such as Jeremiah 1:5, where God declares that he knew his servant before birth and set him apart for a particular assignment. The Chosen One must understand that sanctification is not simply about moral behavior or spiritual discipline, because it also involves separation from certain paths that others may freely walk. When God prepares someone for uncommon use, He often withdraws them from systems and opportunities that seem normal to everyone else. At the time, this withdrawal may feel confusing or even painful because it disrupts expectations about how life should unfold. Yet heaven now reveals that those interruptions were part of a deliberate design shaping your future. What once appeared to be limitation was actually the mark of a life being reserved for something greater than ordinary success. Because of this sanctification, the methods that appear to work easily for other people cannot shape the destiny God prepared for you. Many individuals advance through systems of influence, networking, and opportunity that reward ambition or strategic planning. While these approaches may function effectively for them, they often fail to produce the same results in the life of the chosen one. You may have noticed moments when doors seemed to open effortlessly for others, while remaining firmly closed to you despite your efforts and preparation. This contrast often created the impression that something about your own journey was malfunctioning or unfair. Yet Proverbs 19:21 reminds us that many plans exist in the human heart, but the Lord's purpose ultimately prevails, revealing that God's design for your life does not depend on conventional methods alone. The chosen one operates within a process where divine timing and spiritual preparation matter more than external strategy. Opportunities that appear attractive from a human perspective may remain unavailable because they do not align with the calling resting upon your life. What others gain through ambition, you will often receive through divine appointment. This difference can be difficult to accept until the purpose behind it becomes clear. God's refusal to allow certain doors to open was never rejection, but protection. As the years passed, the pattern of closed doors may have felt like a series of frustrating barriers that prevented you from moving forward at the pace you desired. Watching opportunities unfold around you, while your own progress seemed delayed, could easily lead to discouragement. The chosen one may have wondered why certain relationships, career paths, or opportunities repeatedly dissolved just as they appeared promising. Yet Scripture reveals a powerful principle in Isaiah 22:22, where God declares that what He opens, no one can shut, and what He shuts, no one can open. This statement reminds you that the authority guiding your path does not belong to human systems, but to God alone. The doors that remained closed were not signs of failure, but signs that your destiny required a different foundation than the one those opportunities offered. Some paths that seemed appealing would have gradually pulled you away from the assignment prepared for you. Others might have offered temporary success while quietly undermining the deeper purpose of your calling. Because the chosen one carries a responsibility that extends beyond personal comfort, God often restricts certain directions even when they appear harmless at first glance. Through this process, your journey becomes shaped by divine intention rather than by random chance. Over time, the repeated experience of closed doors begins transforming the way the chosen one interprets limitation. At first, these restrictions appear as obstacles that slow your progress and isolate you from the opportunities others enjoy. Yet with growing understanding, the same limitations begin revealing themselves as boundaries designed to guide you toward a specific destination. Hebrews 12:11 reminds us that discipline rarely feels pleasant at the moment, but later produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who are trained by it. The discipline shaping your life has included the removal of paths that would have diluted your purpose. Each closed door quietly redirected your attention toward the calling God intended you to pursue. Instead of allowing you to become entangled in distractions, God gradually cleared the path that leads toward the work prepared uniquely for you. The chosen one begins recognizing that sanctification does not merely involve spiritual devotion, but also practical separation from environments that would hinder the fulfillment of destiny. What once felt like exclusion now reveals itself as divine focus, guiding your life toward a clearer direction. Another aspect of this design involves the development of character that cannot be formed through convenience or immediate success. When doors open quickly and opportunities appear without resistance, a person may advance rapidly without developing the depth required to sustain long-term influence. In contrast, the path of the chosen one often includes seasons of preparation that refine patience, humility, and resilience. James 1:3-4 explains that the testing of faith produces perseverance, and perseverance eventually leads to maturity and completeness. The delays and obstacles you encountered were therefore shaping qualities necessary for the responsibilities ahead. Through waiting, your faith grew stronger and your dependence on God deepened. Through rejection, your identity became anchored in divine approval rather than human recognition. Through limitation, you learned to trust that God's direction carries greater wisdom than your own expectations. These lessons cannot be taught quickly because they require lived experience rather than theoretical understanding. The sanctification process therefore builds the inner strength needed to carry an uncommon assignment. As heaven now reveals the purpose behind these experiences, the chosen one begins viewing the past through a completely different perspective. The unusual path you walked was not evidence of failure, but confirmation that your life operates under a different system than the one guiding many around you. Romans 8:30 speaks of those whom God predestined, called, justified, and glorified, illustrating how divine purpose unfolds through stages designed by God Himself. Each stage of your journey has been preparing you for the next revelation of that purpose. What once appeared as restriction now becomes evidence of intentional design shaping your destiny. The separation you experienced was not abandonment, but consecration. God withdrew you from certain paths because your life was reserved for a calling that required greater precision. The chosen one now understands that sanctification was the reason your story unfolded differently from the stories you observed around you. Instead of moving through common methods, your life has been guided through uncommon preparation that will soon reveal its meaning. Chosen one, as heaven continues revealing the deeper meaning behind the unusual path you have walked, another truth begins to emerge that may feel both surprising and sobering. Your life was never designed merely to repeat the patterns that existed before you, because God placed something within your spirit that belongs to the future rather than the past. The struggles, delays, and pressures that marked your journey were not random difficulties, but signs that your life carries a new pattern meant to appear through you first. Scripture reflects this principle in Isaiah 43:19. Where God declares that He is doing a new thing that will spring forth in its appointed time. The chosen one must understand that a new thing rarely appears without resistance, because anything unprecedented challenges the systems that already exist. When God introduces something new through a person's life, that individual often becomes the first example of a path that others will later follow. What you experienced as confusion or difference was actually evidence that your life carries innovation within God's kingdom. You are not simply walking a personal journey, but participating in the beginning of something that will influence others who come after you. The sense that your story does not resemble the experiences of people around you comes from the fact that your assignment involves pioneering rather than repeating. In this way, the chosen one becomes part of God's process of introducing change into the world. Because your life carries this pioneering dimension, the preparation you experienced resembles the testing process used when something entirely new is being developed. In the natural world, prototypes are subjected to conditions far more intense than ordinary products will ever face. Engineers expose them to pressure, heat, stress, and repeated trials to ensure that the design can survive circumstances others might not endure. Your spiritual journey followed a similar pattern, where circumstances often pushed you into challenges that seemed far more demanding than what people around you experienced. The chosen one may have wondered why life repeatedly placed you in environments that tested your endurance, faith, and emotional strength beyond what felt reasonable. Yet Scripture reminds us in 1 Peter 1:7 that trials test the genuineness of faith in the same way fire tests gold, revealing its true value. Those intense experiences were not random hardships, but necessary examinations, proving that what God placed within you could survive conditions that would discourage many others. Through these trials, your resilience was strengthened and your understanding deepened. The pressure you felt was not evidence that your life was unstable, but confirmation that it was being examined carefully before its purpose could be revealed fully. Just as prototypes must be tested thoroughly before they are released, your life required preparation that ensured your calling could withstand the challenges attached to it. During these seasons of testing, the Chosen One often felt as though the circumstances surrounding your life were designed to overwhelm rather than prepare you. Situations that demanded patience, courage, or faith seemed to appear one after another without giving you time to recover fully from the previous challenge. At times, the weight of these experiences may have caused you to question whether the pressure itself was evidence that something had gone wrong. Yet heaven now reveals that these trials functioned as demonstrations of the strength already placed inside you. James 1:12 reminds believers that those who persevere under trial will receive the crown of life promised by God, illustrating that endurance reveals something valuable about the person who carries it. The Chosen One discovered that your spirit could survive circumstances that once seemed impossible to endure. Each challenge you overcame quietly proved that the foundation of your life was stronger than the pressures surrounding it. Instead of destroying you, the hardships revealed the durability of your faith and character. In this way, every trial became part of the evidence, showing that the design God placed within you could endure the realities of the world. Another reason these trials were necessary lies in the generational impact connected to your calling. The path you walk does not belong solely to your personal story, but influences the future of your family and those who will follow after you. Many families inherit patterns that continue repeating across generations, including cycles of fear, limitation, or unfulfilled potential. God sometimes raises one individual within a bloodline to interrupt those patterns and introduce a different direction. Deuteronomy 7:9 reminds us that God keeps his covenant of love for 1,000 generations with those who love him and follow his commands. The Chosen One may not have realized that your life carries the potential to reshape the spiritual inheritance of your family. The struggles you endured were not merely personal challenges, but moments where generational barriers were being confronted and broken. Each act of faith you demonstrated created a new possibility for those who will come after you. Instead of inheriting the same limitations that existed before, future generations will inherit the example of courage and faithfulness you established. The hardships you faced, therefore, became part of a larger transformation unfolding within your family's story. Because of this generational dimension, the experiences that once seemed unnecessarily difficult now reveal their deeper purpose. God was not only preparing you for your own calling, but also establishing a foundation that others can build upon in the future. When one person within a family chooses faith, perseverance, and obedience, the influence of those choices extends far beyond a single lifetime. Psalm 78:4 encourages believers to tell the coming generation about the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, so that they may place their hope in God. Your life becomes part of that testimony, demonstrating what is possible when someone trusts God, even during seasons of uncertainty. The Chosen One now realizes that your story carries instructional value for those who will one day look back and draw strength from it. The tests you endured have become examples that will inspire courage in people who face similar challenges later. Instead of simply surviving the trials, you have transformed them into lessons that strengthen the faith of others. Through this process, your journey becomes a blueprint that future generations can study and follow. As heaven reveals these truths, the Chosen One begins viewing your past hardships through a completely different perspective. The pressure you experienced was not evidence that your life was fragile, but confirmation that it carried something strong enough to withstand intense examination. Just as a prototype proves the effectiveness of a new design, your life has demonstrated the strength of the purpose God placed within you. Romans 8:18 reminds us that the sufferings of the present time cannot compare with the glory that will eventually be revealed. The hardships you endured were part of the process through which heaven confirmed the durability of your calling. What once felt like relentless testing now appears as preparation for influence that extends beyond your own generation. The chosen one carries within their life the early expression of something new that God intends to establish through them. Your experiences have become the proof that this new pattern can survive real challenges and still remain faithful to its purpose. In this way, the trials of your past stand as evidence that the future God prepared for your bloodline is already beginning to unfold through you. Chosen one, as heaven continues revealing the deeper meaning behind the seasons you have endured, one of the most difficult truths to understand begins to make sense. The loneliness you experienced was not merely the result of circumstance or misunderstanding, but the cost often attached to leadership that moves ahead of its time. Throughout your journey, you searched for people who could truly understand the vision stirring inside your heart. You hoped to find mentors who had already walked the path you sensed God calling you toward, or companions who could recognize the same direction forming within your spirit. Yet again and again, those conversations seemed to reach a point where understanding stopped. The people around you cared about you, yet they could not fully grasp the nature of what God had placed inside your life. Scripture reflects this experience in Isaiah 55:8, where God reminds us that His thoughts and ways are higher than human understanding, revealing why divine assignments often appear unfamiliar, even to sincere believers. The chosen one was not surrounded by people lacking wisdom, but by people whose journeys followed different designs. Because your assignment was uncommon, very few individuals could immediately recognize its shape. What felt like rejection was often simply the distance between a vision revealed to you and a perspective others had not yet seen. As this pattern continued, the chosen one began noticing that many conversations about your calling ended in confusion rather than clarity. When you attempted to describe the direction you sensed God leading you, listeners often responded with advice that belonged to more familiar paths. Some encouraged you to choose stability over uncertainty, while others suggested methods that worked for them but did not resonate with your spirit. Their intentions were sincere, yet the guidance they offered rarely aligned with the assignment God had placed upon you. Proverbs 29:18 explains that where there is no vision, the people perish, illustrating how understanding depends upon the ability to see what God reveals. The vision you carried required a perspective that many around you had not yet been given. Because of this difference, your journey often felt isolated, even in the presence of supportive relationships. The chosen one may have wondered why God did not simply place someone nearby who understood everything immediately. Yet heaven reveals that your calling required you to move forward without the reassurance that comes from walking behind someone else's example. Instead of following a familiar pattern, you were being asked to step into territory that had not yet been mapped. The loneliness that accompanied this process often felt heavy because human hearts naturally long for companionship and shared understanding. Even strong faith does not remove the desire to be seen and understood by others who walk beside you. There were moments when the chosen one questioned whether the path you sensed was truly from God, simply because no one else seemed able to confirm it with confidence. During those seasons, the silence of others could feel like subtle rejection, as though your ideas or convictions were too unusual to be taken seriously. Yet Scripture reminds us in Galatians 1:10 that those who seek to serve God cannot rely solely on the approval of people. The loneliness you experienced was not evidence that your vision was wrong, but confirmation that it was ahead of its time. God sometimes allows a leader to walk alone temporarily, so that their conviction becomes anchored in divine guidance rather than human affirmation. If your confidence depended entirely on agreement from others, the path ahead would collapse whenever opposition appeared. By allowing you to continue forward without widespread understanding, God strengthened your ability to rely on His voice alone. Through this process, the chosen one learned that faith often grows strongest in moments when external confirmation is absent. Another dimension of this loneliness lies in the nature of pioneering work within God's kingdom. When a path has already been walked many times before, guidance and companionship are readily available because others have already discovered the way. Yet when a new direction emerges, the first person called to walk it must move forward without the benefit of clear examples. This reality appears repeatedly in Scripture, especially in the lives of individuals who introduced new movements of faith or leadership. Abraham left his homeland without knowing the destination God would eventually reveal, trusting that obedience would lead him toward the promise ahead. Hebrews 11:8 describes this journey as an act of faith, where Abraham went out, not knowing where he was going, illustrating the courage required to walk ahead of familiar patterns. The chosen one now recognizes that your path carries similar characteristics. Instead of following a well-established road, you were placed at the front of a direction that others will later recognize. This position naturally creates isolation, because the leader must move ahead before the community can see where the path leads. What once felt like abandonment now reveals itself as the responsibility of someone entrusted with discovery. Heaven offers a powerful image to help the chosen one understand this role more clearly. Imagine the tip of a spear moving forward into resistance before the rest of the spear follows behind it. The leading edge encounters pressure first, clearing the path so that the rest can advance without facing the same resistance. Your life has functioned in a similar way within the spiritual landscape surrounding you. You encountered challenges that seemed unusually intense because your role involved breaking through barriers that once prevented progress. Isaiah 45:2 promises that God goes before his servants to level mountains and break down gates of bronze, revealing how divine assistance accompanies those who pioneer new paths. The loneliness you experienced was part of the process of moving ahead of the crowd. Like an icebreaker ship cutting through frozen waters so that other vessels can follow safely, your journey has been opening passage through environments that once appeared impossible to navigate. The chosen one may not have realized that every obstacle you overcame was creating space for others who will eventually follow the route you established. As heaven now reveals this perspective, the meaning of your earlier loneliness begins to change. What once appeared to be rejection from others now becomes evidence that you were positioned at the forefront of something new. Leaders often stand where others cannot yet stand, because their responsibility involves discovering the path before it becomes visible to everyone else. Romans 8:19 speaks of creation waiting eagerly for the revealing of the children of God, suggesting that certain lives carry influence that extends far beyond their immediate circumstances. The chosen one's journey has been shaping a direction that others will later recognize as guidance. The loneliness you endured was the cost of moving first, of stepping into places where no one could offer immediate understanding, because the path itself was still unfolding. Through that solitude, your faith deepened and your vision became clearer. What once felt like isolation now reveals itself as the position of a pioneer, someone called to break resistance so that others may eventually walk the road you discovered. Chosen one, as heaven continues revealing the deeper meaning behind the unusual battles that have surrounded your life, another truth begins to surface with startling clarity. The intensity of the resistance you encountered was not random misfortune or the product of ordinary life struggles. The enemy recognized the value of your calling long before you fully understood it yourself. Because your life carries a pattern meant to influence your generation and your bloodline, opposition was deployed early in an attempt to interrupt the process before it could fully unfold. Scripture reminds us in 1 Peter 5:8 that the adversary moves like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour, illustrating how spiritual resistance often targets individuals whose lives threaten the influence of darkness. The chosen one was not attacked because you were weak, but because heaven had already marked your life for significance. The forces opposing you sensed the potential within your calling, even when your own understanding was still developing. What felt like relentless difficulty was actually a strategic effort designed to derail the future God placed inside you. The warfare began early because stopping a destiny is easier before it fully awakens. Yet the fact that you are still standing reveals that the strategy designed against you did not achieve its purpose. As you reflect on the experiences that shaped your journey, you may remember how unusual some of the challenges felt compared to the struggles faced by others around you. The difficulties that appeared in your life often carried a strangely personal dimension, as though the circumstances were crafted specifically to undermine your confidence and clarity. Situations that seemed small at first often grew into persistent obstacles that refused to disappear easily. These experiences sometimes left the chosen one wondering why the resistance felt so targeted and continuous. Yet Scripture reminds us in Ephesians 6:12 that our struggle is not merely against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces operating beyond what the eye can see. The pattern of opposition you experienced was not accidental, but carefully designed to interrupt the assignment placed upon your life. When the enemy identifies a calling capable of shifting generational patterns, the resistance often becomes focused and relentless. The unusual nature of the attacks came from the fact that your life was not following an ordinary path. What once appeared to be a series of unrelated hardships now reveals itself as a coordinated attempt to disrupt the unfolding of divine purpose. One of the most common strategies used against the chosen one involved isolation. The enemy understood that separating you from supportive voices and understanding companions would make the journey feel heavier and more uncertain. During certain seasons, you may have noticed that relationships became strained or distant at moments when encouragement was most needed. Friends who once seemed close drifted away, and opportunities for connection sometimes disappeared without clear explanation. This isolation created an environment where doubt could grow quietly within your thoughts. Yet God reminds us in Psalm 27:10 that even if father and mother abandon us, the Lord will receive us, revealing that divine presence remains constant even when human companionship fades. The loneliness you experienced was not proof that you were forgotten, but evidence that the battle around your calling had intensified. Isolation became one of the enemy's primary tools because it allowed discouragement to speak louder than truth. Yet even in those quiet seasons, heaven remained closer than you realized. The chosen one discovered that solitude, while painful, often became the place where God strengthened your relationship with Him more deeply than before. Another element of this targeted strategy involved psychological doubt that slowly attempted to weaken your confidence in the direction God was revealing. The enemy understood that if your mind could be filled with uncertainty, the clarity of your calling would gradually fade. Thoughts questioning your worth, your ability, or the validity of your vision sometimes appeared without warning. These doubts did not always arrive as dramatic accusations, but often appeared as subtle suggestions that quietly undermined your confidence. The chosen one may have wondered whether these thoughts reflected personal insecurity rather than spiritual resistance. Yet Scripture speaks directly to this struggle in 2 Corinthians 10:5, where believers are encouraged to take every thought captive and bring it into obedience to Christ. The battle for your destiny often occurred within the quiet spaces of your mind, where belief and doubt competed for influence. By challenging your perception of yourself, the enemy hoped to convince you that the calling on your life was unrealistic or unattainable. Yet the fact that you continued moving forward, despite those internal battles, reveals the strength of the faith God placed within you. In addition to isolation and doubt, the enemy often introduced distractions designed to drain your energy and redirect your attention away from your purpose. Financial stress, unexpected responsibilities, and emotional exhaustion sometimes appeared at moments when your focus was beginning to sharpen. These pressures created the impression that life's practical difficulties were simply overwhelming your ability to pursue your calling. Yet Scripture reminds us in John 10:10 that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, while Christ brings life in abundance. The distractions surrounding your life were not merely ordinary circumstances, but part of a broader attempt to scatter your attention across countless concerns. The chosen one may have felt pulled in multiple directions, struggling to maintain clarity about the path God had revealed. Yet even within those distractions, God continued guiding your steps quietly. The pressures meant to exhaust your spirit instead strengthened your ability to prioritize what truly mattered. Through perseverance, you learned how to maintain focus even when circumstances attempted to divide your attention. As heaven now reveals the meaning behind these experiences, the chosen one begins recognizing that the warfare surrounding your life was actually confirmation of the calling placed within you. Opposition of such intensity does not appear around lives that carry little influence over the future. The enemy targeted your journey precisely because the assignment connected to your life threatened the continuation of old patterns. James 4:7 encourages believers to submit themselves to God and resist the devil so that he will flee, illustrating that perseverance eventually exposes the weakness of the opposition itself. The fact that you endured these attacks without surrendering your faith demonstrates that the strategy against you failed to achieve its intended result. Instead of destroying your calling, the warfare revealed its value. The challenges that once felt overwhelming now stand as evidence that your life carries significance beyond what you once imagined. What the enemy detected early was the same purpose that heaven is now revealing clearly to the chosen one. Chosen one. As heaven continues unveiling the spiritual dynamics surrounding your journey, it becomes clearer that the opposition you faced was not random, but structured. The resistance against your calling often appeared through several distinct forms of warfare, each designed to interrupt your activation before the moment of breakthrough arrived. These strategies were not always dramatic or obvious, because the enemy rarely attacks destiny in ways that are easily recognized at first. Instead, the pressure often arrived through circumstances that appeared ordinary on the surface, while quietly weakening your clarity and endurance. Scripture reminds us in 2 Corinthians 2:11 that believers must not remain unaware of the enemy's schemes, revealing that spiritual warfare often operates through subtle and persistent patterns. The chosen one did not encounter isolated challenges, but a sequence of pressures carefully arranged to create confusion, exhaustion, and doubt. What seemed like unrelated difficulties were actually coordinated attempts to prevent the activation of the purpose placed upon your life. Each strategy targeted a different dimension of your spirit, seeking to disrupt faith, focus, and emotional stability. The fact that you endured these pressures reveals how deeply heaven had invested in the calling connected to your life. The warfare intensified precisely because the moment of activation was approaching. One of the earliest forms of warfare you encountered was sudden isolation, which appeared when relationships you once trusted began changing unexpectedly. People who once stood close to you sometimes withdrew their support without clear explanation, leaving you wondering what had shifted within those connections. In other cases, misunderstandings developed that created distance between you and individuals who had previously shared your journey. This separation often occurred during moments when encouragement would have been most helpful. The chosen one may have interpreted these changes as personal rejection or failure, questioning whether something in your own behavior had caused the distance. Yet Scripture reminds us in Psalm 34:19 that the righteous person faces many troubles, but the Lord delivers them from them all, illustrating that difficulty does not equal abandonment. The enemy uses isolation because it amplifies discouragement and makes challenges appear larger than they truly are. When supportive voices disappear, negative thoughts gain greater influence within the mind. Yet even in those seasons, God remained present, strengthening your spirit in ways that companionship alone could not accomplish. The isolation that once felt like loss ultimately deepened your dependence on God's guidance. Another form of warfare appeared through counterfeit opportunities that seemed to offer immediate relief from the pressures surrounding your life. These opportunities often looked attractive because they promised quick solutions to the challenges you were facing. Some offered financial stability, recognition, or emotional comfort that seemed to remove the burden of waiting. Yet hidden within these offers was a quiet requirement that would have gradually redirected your focus away from your spiritual assignment. Proverbs 14:12 warns that there is a way that appears right to a person, but ultimately leads toward destruction, revealing how deception often disguises itself as opportunity. The chosen one may have felt tempted to accept certain offers simply to escape the exhaustion created by prolonged struggle. Yet something within your spirit hesitated, sensing that the relief offered would come at the cost of the deeper purpose God had placed upon your life. By resisting these counterfeits, you preserved the integrity of your calling, even when the alternative path appeared easier. What looked like missed opportunity was actually protection from compromise. Heaven was guiding you away from shortcuts that would have weakened your destiny. A third form of warfare targeted your physical and emotional strength through nights of anxiety and sleeplessness. During certain seasons, your mind refused to settle even when your body longed for rest. Thoughts moved rapidly through your mind, replaying concerns about the future, responsibilities, and unanswered questions about the direction of your life. These restless nights gradually drained your energy, leaving you exhausted during the day and uncertain about how long you could continue carrying the weight of your journey. Psalm 4:8 reminds us that God grants sleep to those who trust in Him, illustrating that rest is part of the peace He intends for His people. Yet the enemy often attempts to attack the mind precisely because fatigue weakens clarity and resilience. The chosen one experienced nights when prayer felt like the only way to quiet the storm within your thoughts. Through those prayers, God sustained your spirit, even when physical rest was limited. The sleepless nights that once felt unbearable became moments where your dependence on God grew deeper. Instead of collapsing under exhaustion, your faith continued seeking His presence for strength. Perhaps the most subtle form of warfare appeared through internal gaslighting that attempted to rewrite your understanding of the calling God had revealed. Doubts arose within your mind, questioning whether the vision you carried was truly from God or simply the result of personal imagination. Memories of earlier moments of guidance began to feel uncertain, as new thoughts suggested that you might have misunderstood what God had spoken. This internal conflict created a dangerous possibility that you might abandon your calling voluntarily, believing that the path was never meant for you in the first place. Yet Scripture reminds us in John 10:27 that God's sheep recognize His voice, revealing that divine guidance leaves a distinct imprint upon the spirit. The chosen one had already experienced moments where God's direction felt unmistakably clear. The enemy attempted to erase that clarity by flooding your mind with uncertainty and second-guessing. Through perseverance, you learned to distinguish between the quiet voice of God and the disruptive noise of doubt. Each time you returned to prayer and reflection, the original conviction began rising again within your heart. The internal battle, therefore, became another opportunity to strengthen your trust in God's guidance. As heaven now reveals the pattern behind these experiences, the chosen one begins recognizing that each form of warfare targeted a specific vulnerability. Isolation attacked your relationships. Counterfeit opportunities attacked your direction. Sleeplessness attacked your endurance, and internal doubt attacked your confidence in God's voice. Yet despite these coordinated pressures, none of these strategies succeeded in stopping the purpose placed within your life. Instead, they revealed the resilience God had already built inside you. James 4:7 instructs believers to submit themselves to God and resist the devil so that he will flee, demonstrating that persistence eventually exposes the limits of opposition. The battles you endured were not signs that your calling was fragile, but confirmation that it carried significant value. What the enemy attempted to stop through confusion and exhaustion ultimately strengthened your readiness for activation. The warfare itself became evidence that something important was about to unfold in the life of the Chosen One. Chosen One, as heaven continues unveiling the deeper meaning behind your life's unusual path, another revelation emerges that explains why the pressure surrounding your journey has often felt heavier than what many others carry. You are not only someone being prepared for a unique assignment, but someone chosen to function as an originator within your bloodline. A prototype demonstrates something new, yet an originator goes further by establishing the beginning of an entirely different pattern. God now reveals that your life stands at a turning point in the history of your family, where cycles that continued for generations are meant to reach their end. The struggles, tests, and resistance you experienced were not only about shaping your personal character, but about positioning you as the person through whom change begins. Scripture reflects this generational impact in Isaiah 58:12, where it says that those who walk faithfully with God will rebuild ancient ruins and restore foundations for future generations. The Chosen One must understand that this calling carries significance far beyond individual success or recognition. Your obedience and perseverance are part of a larger transformation, affecting people you may never even meet. The pressure you felt often came from standing at the intersection where the past ends and the future begins. In this place, God entrusts certain individuals with the responsibility of changing the direction of an entire lineage. Throughout your life, you may have noticed patterns within your family that seemed to repeat themselves across multiple generations. These patterns might have appeared in different forms, yet the underlying struggles often carried familiar themes, such as financial instability, addiction, broken relationships, or spiritual confusion. The Chosen One may have watched relatives wrestle with the same difficulties that earlier generations faced before them, creating the sense that certain challenges were almost woven into the family story. In many cases, people within those cycles attempt to overcome them, but lack the spiritual support or understanding required to break free completely. Yet God sometimes raises one individual within a family to confront these patterns directly and establish a new foundation. Galatians 3:13 reminds us that Christ redeemed us from the curse so that blessing might replace what once brought limitation, illustrating how divine intervention can transform generational patterns. Your life has been positioned to interrupt cycles that seemed permanent before you arrived. Instead of repeating the struggles you inherited, you have been called to rewrite the direction of your family's story through faith and obedience. The battles you faced were not simply personal obstacles, but encounters with forces that attempted to preserve the old patterns. Because of this role, the pressure you experienced often felt disproportionate to the stage of life you were in. The Chosen One may have carried responsibilities, emotional burdens, or spiritual battles that seemed too heavy for one person to manage alone. At times, you may have wondered why your path required so much endurance, while others appeared to move forward without similar resistance. Yet heaven now reveals that the weight you felt was connected to the role of being the first to stand in a new direction. When someone becomes the first person in a family to establish a new spiritual foundation, they often confront the accumulated resistance of generations that came before. Isaiah 54:17 declares that no weapon formed against God's people will prosper, reminding you that even powerful opposition cannot ultimately stop what God intends to accomplish. The Chosen One's endurance was not simply about surviving personal challenges, but about holding the line where old patterns attempted to continue. Every decision you made to pursue faith, discipline, and integrity weakened the influence those patterns once carried. In this way, your life became a turning point where history began shifting direction. Another dimension of this calling involves the construction of a spiritual foundation strong enough to support the lives of those who will come after you. Foundations often remain unseen, yet they determine the strength and stability of everything built above them. The Chosen One may have felt frustrated during seasons where progress seemed slow, unaware that God was shaping the structure beneath the visible parts of your life. Psalm 127:1 reminds us that unless the Lord builds the house, the labor of those who build it remains in vain. illustrating that lasting change begins with divine guidance rather than human effort alone. The obedience you practice today creates conditions that future generations will inherit as stability rather than struggle. Your commitment to prayer, faith, and wisdom establishes a spiritual environment that did not exist before. The family members who come after you may not fully understand the battles you faced, yet they will benefit from the path you opened. Instead of beginning their lives surrounded by the same limitations you inherited, they will start from a place shaped by your courage and perseverance. Through your faithfulness, the foundation beneath your family is being rebuilt. As heaven reveals this truth, the Chosen One begins understanding why your life has often carried a sense of responsibility that felt larger than personal ambition. The calling placed upon you involves more than achieving success for yourself. It includes becoming the person who changes what is possible for the generations that follow. Deuteronomy 30:19 describes a moment where God calls his people to choose life so that both they and their descendants may live, highlighting the generational impact of individual obedience. Your decisions today extend far beyond your own experience because they shape the environment future members of your family will inherit. The courage required to remain faithful during difficult seasons becomes the stability others will one day stand upon. Every moment you chose faith instead of fear and perseverance instead of surrender strengthened the new pattern God is establishing through you. The Chosen One is therefore not only an example of resilience, but the origin point of transformation within your lineage. When you look back on the challenges that once felt overwhelming, they now reveal themselves as evidence of the responsibility placed upon your life. The struggles were not meaningless obstacles, but the resistance encountered when something old begins to break apart. Romans 8:19 speaks about creation waiting eagerly for the revealing of the children of God, illustrating how certain lives carry influence that extends far beyond their personal journey. Your story forms part of that revelation, because it demonstrates how faith can interrupt cycles that seemed impossible to change. The pressure you carried was the weight of standing at the beginning of something new. Through obedience and perseverance, you have created a different starting point for the generations that will come after you. The Chosen One now understands that your life was never meant to follow the same patterns you inherited. Instead, you were chosen to become the origin of a new story that future generations will continue to build upon. Chosen One, as heaven continues revealing the depth of the calling placed upon your life, another instruction begins to emerge with quiet urgency. One of the greatest dangers for someone chosen to originate a new pattern is the temptation to speak too early about what God is still forming in secret. When a vision first begins appearing in the heart, the natural desire is often to share it with others in search of encouragement or confirmation. Yet many divine assignments begin as fragile seeds that require protection before they can survive the exposure of public attention. Scripture reflects this wisdom in Proverbs 29:11, which reminds us that a wise person learns restraint rather than releasing every thought immediately. The Chosen One must understand that not every revelation from God is meant to be shared at the moment it is received. Some visions are given in private because they must mature in silence before they can stand confidently in the open. When spoken too early, even sincere listeners may respond with confusion or skepticism, simply because the vision belongs to a future they cannot yet see. What heaven reveals today may require seasons of quiet growth before it becomes visible to others. Silence, therefore, becomes an act of stewardship rather than secrecy. As your understanding deepens, you begin recognizing that sharing a developing vision with the wrong audience can expose it to forces that weaken its growth. When fragile dreams encounter doubt, criticism, or misunderstanding, the effect can quietly erode the confidence required to carry them forward. Some people respond to unfamiliar ideas with skepticism, not because they wish harm, but because the vision does not match their expectations of what is possible. Others may feel threatened by a calling that surpasses the limits they placed upon their own lives. Proverbs 18:21 reminds us that life and death exist in the power of the tongue, illustrating how words can strengthen or weaken what is forming in the heart. The chosen one may have already experienced moments where sharing a small portion of your vision resulted in reactions that created confusion rather than clarity. Those experiences were not accidents, but lessons about the importance of discernment. Not every person is equipped to understand the responsibility God has placed upon you. When a vision is exposed prematurely to doubt or jealousy, the spiritual atmosphere surrounding it can become unstable. By guarding your words carefully, you protect what God is building until it grows strong enough to withstand misunderstanding. Another dimension of this silence involves spiritual interference that can arise when divine plans become visible before their appointed time. The enemy often monitors the direction of a calling, searching for opportunities to introduce obstacles that disrupt its development. When a vision is announced prematurely, it can attract attention from forces that seek to distort or sabotage what God intends to accomplish. Ecclesiastes 3:7 teaches that there is a time to keep silent and a time to speak, revealing that wisdom lies in recognizing the difference between those seasons. The chosen one must understand that silence is not a sign of fear, but a form of spiritual strategy. By limiting what others know about your future, you reduce the number of ways interference can appear. This discipline does not mean living in secrecy, but practicing discernment about which conversations truly serve the growth of your calling. When God instructs someone to remain quiet about a vision, He is often shielding that vision from unnecessary conflict. Silence becomes a protective boundary surrounding something sacred. Through this restraint, the promise continues developing without distraction. The discipline of silence also strengthens your personal relationship with God, because it shifts the focus of your conversations from people back toward heaven. When a vision is widely shared, the temptation arises to measure its value through the reactions of others. Positive responses may create excitement, while negative responses may create doubt, leaving your confidence dependent on human approval rather than divine guidance. Yet when the chosen one holds a vision quietly within prayer, the primary conversation about that future remains between you and God. Psalm 25:14 explains that the Lord confides in those who fear Him, suggesting that deeper revelations often emerge through private communion rather than public declaration. In the quiet space of prayer, your understanding continues developing without interruption. Instead of seeking affirmation from many voices, you learn to rely on the clarity that comes through spiritual intimacy. The silence surrounding your calling therefore deepens your dependence on God's direction, rather than the opinions of others. This relationship becomes the place where your confidence grows strongest. As time passes, the chosen one begins recognizing that silence does not prevent progress, but actually preserves it. Many people assume that sharing their plans widely will create opportunities or attract support. Yet premature exposure often invites complications that delay the very progress they hope to achieve. By guarding your words carefully, you allow the vision to mature without unnecessary pressure. Luke 2:19 describes how Mary treasured and pondered the revelations she received about Jesus in her heart, illustrating how divine insight sometimes requires quiet reflection before public action. Your calling follows a similar pattern, where the most important developments occur beneath the surface before they become visible. The silence you maintain creates space for God to arrange circumstances that will support the vision when it is finally revealed. Instead of forcing events through human effort, you allow heaven to prepare the environment where your calling can flourish. In this way, restraint becomes part of the process of preparation. Eventually, a moment will arrive when the vision God placed inside you becomes strong enough to stand openly without fear of interference. At that time, the silence that once protected it will naturally give way to clarity and action. Isaiah 60:22 promises that when the time is right, God will make something happen quickly, revealing how divine timing transforms quiet preparation into visible fulfillment. The chosen one does not need to rush toward that moment because the promise itself carries the authority required to reveal it. Until that appointed time arrives, your responsibility is to guard what God entrusted to you with patience and wisdom. By limiting access to your deepest plans, you preserve the strength of the calling developing within your life. The silence you practice today becomes the shield that protects tomorrow's fulfillment. Through careful discernment and disciplined speech, you allow the promise to grow undisturbed until the day God decides it is ready to be seen by the world.